Welcome everyone. Here on the edge of the precipice, a couple of hours before the episode 6 finale goes live, I want to take the time to do a Q&A. I try and get one of these out every week, and a couple of weeks back, I advertised for some super Q&A questions. So if nobody knows what the super Q&A is, it's where I try to give a little bit longer, a little bit more detailed answers to people. We go on longer, we try to answer pretty much anything. So people might ask me more personal things here. People might ask me questions you've heard 1,000 answers to before. But it's kind of a perk for people who support me on the website Patreon, which is really how I get to live my life. So if you want to join in on these, there's a link in the description. And otherwise, I hope everybody enjoys listening to their questions being answered. And hopefully we get some cool discussion out of it. So, in no particular order here, because I'm just trying to go through all of them at once. Jesse Cocker is coming in first with this question. Just how far do you think the Balthazar plotline will go? Do you also think that there's room in the game scope to feature all 6 gods, as well as the remaining Elder Dragons? Also, I guess Balthazar facing Primordus puts an end to the Gods of Dragons fan theory. That Gods of Dragons fan theory was always kind of, to me, a stepping stone. It never worked, ever. It was more a thematic tie you could make between various gods and dragons that then broke down if you tried to ever apply any real detail. I think that, broadly speaking, what that theory really illustrates is that the gods wrestle with the same domains of power and different aspects of magic in the same way that Elder Dragons do. You know how, since Heart of Thorns, they've really been quite clear that Elder Dragons have dominion over various aspects of magic. I think that what we see with the gods is they're just very good at using various areas of magic, and it's not necessarily anything deeper of a tie than that. But to your main question about the idea of, like, how far are they going to go with Balthazar? Because we have Balthazar, does this mean Dwayne is going to come down and Dwayne is going to say, Balthazar, please no? And then Melandri's going to come down and Melandri's going to say, oh no, I'm on Balthazar's side, until we have the entire group. Is there scope for this in the game? I think there is a chance the game could do this. There's no, like, totally closed doors, really. But is it something I'd like to see? I'm actually not so sure. I was talking about this recently. My favorite god is Lissa. But my favorite god is Lissa because she is inscrutable and because she is unknowable and because she kind of represents, to me, a really interesting thing about gods and godliness, both in the real world and in fantasy RPGs, where there's, like, to believe in gods is to believe in paradoxes and is to believe in the great mover and is to believe that is to just sort of move these great questions of where did everything come from and what happened here and what happened here just one rung up, and nothing is ever truly answered. And that idea that they're so great and so powerful that they have to be unknowable, that there is no logic there, really, you have to go on faith alone. And these are all really intangible, ephemeral ideas that I love. And I love that Lissa represents them, that she could be 2 things at once but one entity, all this kind of stuff. And I kind of hate the idea of getting rock solid, tangible answers about Lissa. Hi, my name is Lissa. I'm from planet Earth, blah, blah, blah. I would actually hate that. So I kind of don't want to see it, but is it there in the scope? It is. And I'm open to the idea that they could do it in a way that would shock and surprise me, that I would love. It's just, I would be if I was in that writer's room, I don't think I'd ever do it. But I'm a big believer that aspects of world building and aspects of lore can exist purely for the mystery, and they don't have to be resolved. I wasn't a big believer in that for a long time, but I think as I've grown older, I've started to like stuff like that. So we'll see. Juxt Solace has a message from the book Bloodstones in the Priory Archives during Hidden Arcana and Arcana Obscura. Each bloodstone apparently has a property: aggression, destruction, preservation, and denial. I thought it might be curious if the bloodstone used to empower Balthazar, despite exploding, was the one for preservation, since it preserved or empowered the god back to some form of strength. If Balthazar was depowered prior to the bloodstone explosion, how did he end up as Lazarus among the White Mantle if he was comatose / non-active? Furthermore, how did the White Mantle find his body? It's a major plot point that I hope they delve into. Did the mantle just happen across him playing dead, as the decision by Balthazar was to seemingly consciously absorb the Bloodstone's power? It seems he placed himself so they would find him. How did he do this? Or is it entirely possible that he was cast out of the Pantheon many years ago and imprisoned in the body of Lazarus? Lazarus. Back to the Bloodstone thing, despite revitalizing Balthazar, the stone in Bloodstone Fen could be the one for aggression, as many people have become crazed after exposure to the dust/residue. What might be interesting if we come into contact with another Bloodstone, people in contact with it having very different reaction to its properties. What are the chances that Balthazar is acting aggressive due to exposure to the aggressive Bloodstone? What are your thoughts on this, and would it be worth delving into for the dev team? Well, you've touched on a billion different topics here, so I'll try and address each of them. First of all, this idea that he'd been cast out many years ago and just imprisoned in the body of Lazarus. That's an interesting idea because it's kind of to suggest maybe the Lazarus we saw in GW1 was also Balthazar. I'm not sure I really like that idea, but it does explain a kind of a weird thing where the original Lazarus in the first game was a fire elementalist for a while, I believe. Or maybe just an elementalist in general, which doesn't necessarily have to be Balthazar, but also for a while was a necromancer. I'm not sure how much I like that idea, but the trailer for the finale we're about to experience does ultimately show, sort of suggest that he'd stayed around for ages, unless that's a double bluff and they're talking about another of the gods. But I think you're right that there's something that the game is really not touched on well enough, and that's how did we sort of deceive the White Mantle from Balthazar's perspective. So my initial sort of take from this story was a little bit more skippy and a bit more jumpy than yours. You've really got this very clear idea of a physical body having to be swapped. I kind of figured, hey, we're dealing with gods and incredibly powerful people, and even if Balthazar's a fallen god, he's still very powerful. And I kind of just had this weird idea that right in the middle of the ritual, the Horcrux ritual that the White Mantle were doing, Balthazar just TP'd in at the end of it. Or, you know, right as the Bloodstone exploded, he blew up the Bloodstone. Or, you know, he just made sure he was there at the right time and that there was no, like, there was no fake body or anything like this. He just teleported in or something. That was the impression I had. But, you know, we're both right, essentially. Either could happen. And so that's why I think that, yeah, you're right. Maybe they really should touch on this in the game a little bit more. And then finally to the idea of each Bloodstone having a specific area. It's a funny topic because it was very clearly written as some really fluffy lore way back in 2006 in the Prophecies Manual, just to talk a little bit and weirdly try to loosely tie together why people have to specialize into professions and different professions excel at different kinds of magic. So very vaguely it was like, okay, there's a Denial Bloodstone and Mesmers are Mesmers because they tap into this Bloodstone more than any other. And it really was, in my opinion, quite unnecessary thing to do as well, because Guild Wars 1 had secondary classing and stuff. And it was to the point that it never really ever was relevant for any of the Bloodstone related stories in GW1. And the Bloodstones came back for Eye of the North. And it was never really talked about in-game either in Guild Wars 1. You can think of this as lore, but if I remember rightly, there was so little reference to it in GW1 itself. It's mostly, you know, just this setting world building that they did with the manual. The same manual that hinted at like a brother for Prince Rurik that we also never saw and stuff like this. So then it gets even more interesting with Guild Wars 2. The devs quite bluntly moved away from it and said, look, that was more of a human interpretation of the way that the Bloodstones work, and it's not necessarily right. And so who knows how they feel about it now. I would think that if this is going to be a real story point, and if they are going to try and go back to those, they would have to do it sooner rather than later. I don't think it's necessary for them to actually go into for the dev team. I mean, because there's so many stories at the time. Next question on the list is from someone called Sean Wood. Very weird name. They say, let's talk lore. How was Medivh not able to resist the whispers from Sargeras? He was, after all, the Guardian. It was literally his job to protect the world from great cosmic threats, exactly like Sargeras and his armies. I get his mind was poisoned, but wouldn't it make sense for him to have noticed something wrong and tried to cleanse himself of such things? It was his job, after all. I think you're being really, really unfair to Medivh on this one, because you are right that that was kind of their established roles. But his mind was poisoned before he was born, right? Like, the idea that he would notice something is wrong and then try to cleanse himself. It's one of those weird things where if you think something is normal, if something's just continuously, perpetually happening in your childhood and then throughout your life, you don't realize that there's something different. I read a lovely article online very recently about a kid that had some colon issue and basically never pooped, then eventually had to go in and get surgery to have this massive, you know, mass of waste removed from his body. Otherwise, he was basically on threat of losing his life. He didn't realize there was anything different. He didn't realize there was anything wrong with his life. He didn't realize that this sickness he had carried with him was not what everybody else was experiencing. And I think that really, if you can forgive a child for making a mistake or not realizing something's up, you can certainly forgive someone who was poisoned before they were even born, before they were even on a baby. And, you know, that's why that was such a master stroke and a great plan for the Burning Legion. Next question comes in from Umbra, who says, in the book Edge of Destiny, we read that Jenna recalls Logan for aid in Divinity's Reach. We know that Jenna is powerful enough to take care of herself, no less with Anissa's help. Do you think she was aware of the consequences of killing Kralkatorrik, given Destiny's Edge would succeed if he was present? Would the release of magic surge to Zaitan, Jormag, or even Steve? Or perhaps she didn't want the child to have such an easy time around there. Who knows? Yeah, you know, this is a weird one. You just made me realize, by the way, as I was reading it, I've had this conversation a great many times, but you've made me realize that one thing I've never thought of is everyone always assumes that Logan got called away, and they absolutely, definitively would have won. The Heir's plan was 100% fail-proof as long as Logan was there. And, you know, it was Heir's failing and not building a strong enough contingency plan. But we don't even know that, really. Maybe Jenna knew somehow that even if Logan was there, it would have gone tits up, but maybe it would have been even worse. Maybe not just Snaff would have died, but lots more people will have died as well. This would have been an excellent thing to do. If Jenna had this like prophetic level to her, it would have been excellent to talk about during Heart of Thorns when the Chronomancers became tied to mesmerishness, but they never really did that. And yeah, it's an interesting story, I think, because it's not told in game, it's told in one of the novels. And, you know, like, we did that trailer analysis, and I did all that speculation that Livia could be in the trailer or could be in the final episode and stuff. It's always weird bringing stories like that back. The more obscure the story, the older the story, a lot of players just aren't in tune with them anymore. They don't think about them. And so it could be a story that really should get an answer, and they should tap into. And I would think that this would be a great example of that. But a lot of players aren't calling for it anymore just because it's too far in the back of their minds. And I would be very scared when they do stuff like this of alienating people who hadn't played GW1 or alienating people who hadn't read the book. You know, those are scary things, and I wonder if that's what ArenaNet are wrestling with to some extent. Umbra also has a double question. They say throwback to a Q&A from 2013, which was the first question you asked. Jesus, well, you've been watching for a long time. What you thought of the portal northwest of Brisbane Wildlands and where the portal might lead to. Allow me to repeat the question now that we know a lot more about what's been happening compared to back then. Do you have any additional thoughts on this topic? And you've even linked to the video. I don't know what I said back in 2013. I would think my opinion hasn't changed too much. That would be an interesting area of of Kryta to go to, but not necessarily Kryta either, but also Maguma Wastes. So if you break up Guild Wars 2 into its constituent regions, you've got Kryta, you've got Ascalon, you've got the Shiver Peaks, and so on, so on, so on. Kryta is a weird one because it encompasses a lot of sort of extra areas. Like, I wouldn't really think of Bloodtide Coast being Kryta, but it's counted. I wouldn't think of South Sun as Kryta, but it's being counted. Now, the smallest region in the game is the Maguma Waste. It only has 2 maps. Both of them were Season 2 maps. And, you know, when you look at the raid, which is located near north of this Brisbane Bandit Bridge, when you look at some of the other stuff going on in the area, I really like the idea of there just being another Maguma Wastes map. I think that would have been a great idea for this final release to have finally taken us across that bridge. That bridge is now, though, if we're going to Ore instead, that bridge is now, in a weird way, very exciting to me because it's in such an obvious place for us to go for so many years, and we've just not gone there. It's like they're teasing us about it now. You know, we saw a Dry Top get added, we saw the fort end up getting used, we see so many maps get used and logical places that we go to, and this bridge still is not in use. Perhaps something for the expansion itself if they surprise us and give us places outside of just one core region, or beyond that, of course, as well, Living World Season 4. I know it might seem really weird that I talk about Living World Season 4 in videos like this, but if what Mo said in the episode 5 AMA is to be believed, Season 4 may not be that long away, and it may not be that useless. You know, I think I certainly am still very stuck in this mindset of on some level thinking, oh yeah, we'll get episode 6 now, and then it'll be like, 9 months and we'll get an expansion. Then it'll be like another 9 months before we even think about season 4. That's not true. We might be playing season 4 in like less than 6 months. 72 days between every release, guys, they've done so far. And Mo suggested that they were just going to try and drop the expansion in like it was an episode. 72 days. That, we could be 140 days away from playing season 4. If that doesn't get you excited, and this is probably a terrible thing to talk about, I don't know what does. So yeah, maybe we'll go to the bridge at that point. But yeah, it's an exciting area of the game, definitely. Next question is from Yggdrasil. WP, what's your favorite and least favorite story arc in core Tyria personal story? And what would you change if you could change one thing about either of them, if you would? Okay, now, as people know, I hate favorite, where people ask me to pick a favorite. It's very hard to pick a favorite for something so big, and it's hard to compare different things. Really, this is just an excuse to riff on a topic that's important to me. So I will give you an answer. I don't know whether this is my least favorite arc, but one part of the personal story I think that people really don't appreciate how bad it is a Deus Ex Machina at the end of the personal story, but it's not the glory of Tyria. It's not, oh, here's this sudden airship popping into existence that's only been vaguely alluded to within the most recent 20 minutes of gameplay that then kills the dragon. That's a big Deus Ex Machina. That's very well documented. We've talked about that a lot. If you properly analyze the story, and I mean the full story of the personal story, there's also another big problem too. And this is actually with the cleansing of ore. Guild Wars 2's personal story is really about 2 different wild hunts. It's about Kaith trying to kill the dragon. It's about Traherne trying to cleanse ore. And the cleansing of ore is just as bad. If you actually look at how they introduce that, you have the big failure where you go to Azikabar, the torture tombs, and you're trying to complete this ritual, and mechanically it's awful. It's supposed to be a defense event, but nothing's really going on. And you basically get to this point where it's like, okay, what do we do next? And they just throw a story step at you. They honestly just throw a random story step at you right at the end, where they say, oh, there's a priory ritual we've discovered where we can cleanse ore. That's their answer to how ore can be cleansed. This big question. This is the real subject material that they should have been tackling. And they just come out at the last second and say, oh, yeah, we found a ritual. Yeah, and we just have to do it. Then I believe that's the part of the story that leads you into the torture tomb, which then sort of segues through several other things. And it's just awful. It's really awful how randomly and suddenly they just throw different things at the camera, basically. So I would really dive into that, and that would be one thing that I would love to change about the personal story, that I would really like to feed more clearly through the entirety of the ore arc. For people that don't know, my opinion about the personal story is essentially it's 2 stories. There's a personal story, which I would also call a domestic story, which is full of choice, and that's more to do with your biography, and it's to do with the Black Citadel, and it's to do with the Grove, and it's to do with the Divinity's Reach, and they're all kind of separate stories. If I could really, break apart the personal story and remold it into something good, I would treat that as its own thing, with its own arc, its own section that people can do, and it encompasses lots of tutorialization in level 1 to 40. And after that point, you would have the story of Zaitan's death, and it would be told very similar, much less choice. Perhaps you could have 3 versions of this story, 1 for each order, but I wouldn't really go too much further than that. And it would be told in a similar way to how Living World and Heart of Thorns and this next expansion presumptively will be told, and that it's a long, coherent story that actually makes sense and it feeds things through properly. That is how I would love to do that. So that's one really weak part of the story, I think. A much more interesting question maybe is actually a really strong part of the story, something I really enjoy. And here's the weird thing. It's a tricky one to answer for me because I actually love all of it. It's just you have to look at it from an incredibly broad perspective for me to get that joy out of it. It's like the second it transitions from being a concept and an idea and a theoretical setting and a theoretical story, as soon as it translates into something you can actually play and you see the detail and the talent that went into it and you see it all fall apart, that's where I start to dislike it. But if I take a big enough step back that I can just see in essence what, Guild Wars 2's core story is, I love it. I love the idea of these tanks and airships and submarines and united races of the world traveling through such a rich setting as Ore, with all of its magic, and you know how it's at the bottom of the sea. And I love the idea of these undead, and the way that Zaitan's armies form, and the way that he sends these ships and these fleets out to gather magical artifacts to come back and feed on, and how he's corrupted everyone. And them perhaps a little bit overdone, but I really like the zombie themes to the game. I really like there's a lot of nautical themes in the game as well. There's a lot of really awesome stuff that I very, very, very much enjoy. I love kind of the tragic idea behind Traherne. I love as well, as cliched as it may be, this idea of a scholar becoming a battle commander. I like that story. There's so much that I really enjoy about it, pretty much any second of it. Even the domestic stories to a lesser extent, because a lot of the domestic stories are copy-paste, just, oh, there's a threat on our city, what do we do? But, broad strokes, particularly the Zyklon, I love it. I love Claw Island, I love all of it. It's just the actual implementation. And so that's kind of my answer. Maybe a cop-out answer, but that's the God's to honest truth. And that's why I care so much about the whole thing, really. Next question, Chaos Gyro. When you get around to creating Elder Scrolls content, do you foresee doing as much as possible in one playthrough, or splitting up your content into smaller, more targeted runs that only complete relevant stories? For example, Dark Brotherhood Mage, Stormcloak Partisan. Exactly, yes, that's well done, Chaos Gyro. You're a man after my own heart. That is exactly how I want to do the Elder Scrolls stuff. So that is totally, because of the craziness of Guild Wars 2 right now, on the back burner, but I have been playing a lot of Arena, and I'm still very much solid on how I want to present that series, and that's exactly. So people who watch my alternate Let's Plays, I go very deep into those games, and I try to give everything. And it's very much apparent that Elder Scrolls is a game where that is sort of a ludicrous thing to do, all in one. So my answer to this is what Chaos Gyro says. So what I'm going to be doing is main series playthroughs first. So you will see the main quest of Arena, the main quest, generally speaking, of Daggerfall. Now, those two games are a little bit different to the next three, so they might be a bit more comprehensive. But, particularly when we get to Morrowind, we'll be trying to do the main thread in the houses, right? And then we'll go straight into Oblivion, and we will be dealing with the Oblivion crisis. Then we'll go into Skyrim, and we will do the Skyrim main story. At that point, we might go back to Oblivion to check out the Mages Guild story. Or we might go back to Morrowind to check out the Morag Tong. Or we might go to Oblivion to check out the Shivering Isles expansion. And we'll have targeted playthroughs like that. And this way, I can ask you guys which story you want to see. And yeah, I got a million different thoughts on that. But it's pretty much on the back burner for as long as we're unsteady on what ArenaNet's doing and how much time I'll be dedicating to basically the main thing people would watch me for. As much as I would love to also pursue all these other ideas, I'm sort of shackled to where I began, which is Guild Wars at the moment, and I'm very happy to be, but it just means that I have to prioritize in certain ways. Moving on, we've got Anve, who said, well, you said any questions, so here it goes. I recently picked up a Sherlock Holmes game, and the general quality of it has blown me away. Have you ever played one of these games, watched the show, or read any of the books? Side note, while playing through it, I just kept thinking about how amazing it would be for a British content creator with a British accent to cover a game based on the works of a British author and containing a British voice acting. Would you be up for it? Although I assume it would be rather low on the priority list. PPPS, I'm not trying to sell a product or anything, so feel free to limit a response to the first part and leave out the side note. No, it's okay. I'm not that flinchy at people doing stuff like that. So, yeah, I don't know whether I can call myself a fan of Sherlock Holmes. I really enjoyed the Robert Downey Jr. and Jude Law movies. And I really liked Stephen Moffat's interpretation with Benedict Cumberbatch for the first 2 seasons, really. I think the latest stuff that show did was god-awful. Some of the worst TV that you could... Like, to see the fall of a great TV show is always a sad thing. That was a very sad thing for me. It was offensive to me, almost, on so many levels, how phoned in that was and how bad some of the issues with that season was. So that was very unfortunate. So I don't know whether I can say I'm a fan. I certainly haven't read the books, and I feel like that's probably the bar to entry to call yourself a Sherlock Holmes fan, isn't it? As for game media, I actually have watched a couple of Let's Plays of people playing the Sherlock Holmes games, and they're different producers, and there's loads of different games out there as far as I'm aware, but a couple of them do actually look really quite good, actually. Very reminiscent to me of The Raven, which is a format of game, is a style of game I actually think is really incredible. You know, I think period pieces like that and that kind of gameplay is so cool. cool. And I think it's a real shame that the company that made the Raven didn't get to produce more interesting things, because what they did essentially slots very beautifully into a Sherlock Holmesy kind of format. Is it ever going to appear on YouTube? I'm sorry, I can basically say no. There's just too many other exciting things out there for me right now. Ruben Van Limbergen. My question is going to be simple this time. Can we have a picture of your dog? Perhaps one with silly paper hat. Aren't dogs the coolest pets ever? I would, but it's not my dog. I don't have a dog around me right now. It's not my dog. I don't live with it. I just sometimes have the dog. And I think every single picture of my dog would have some other incriminating aspect of my personal life I'd rather not show. So unfortunately, no, not in this. If the dog was here, I promise I would have taken a picture. It's just a black Labrador. There's really no defining aspect to him beyond that. It's a male black lab. You can probably imagine he's very cute. Next question, MMJSE Clark. AWP, you mentioned in a previous video that you wanted to do a lot of world traveling in real life, and that even a list of places. My question, if you could take an adventure or be a tourist in any Guild Wars 2 map that has been released thus far, which one would it be and why? Are there any specific sites you would absolutely want to see with your own eyes? Also, you don't need to worry about safety because Queen Jenna will accompany you as your personal bodyguard. Oh man, see, this is a hard question to answer. It's a lot harder to answer than most people appreciate. Now, as someone who has played both Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2 in VR, and as someone who studied a lot of VR-related topics back when it was sort of burgeoning onto the scene, I can tell you one thing most people don't appreciate about video game environments is how huge they are. Like, if you actually put someone with good stereo 3D and a high FOV on a head-mounted display over their face, and you put them in pretty much any game environment, the areas you're exploring, like a small cabin that you might be sitting in, is actually like a vast mansion-scale style room. And you don't realize this until you're in the head-mounted display. So the truth is that basically this is such a cop-out answer, but anywhere in Guild Wars 2 is a billion times grander and more insane than you'd expect. Like, to visit Divinity's Reach truly in real life, it would be ludicrously insane. I mean, there's so many. I mean, it's hard to sort of know what I'd go for as a tourist. Would it just be grandeur and seeing the sights in terms of like natural beauty? Would we go to Lornar's Pass and see some of these crazy places? Or would you want to go somewhere and be driven by lore and fueled by lore? The thing with the lore thing is, it's not like if I visited in real life, I'd extract more information, would I, than what is already presented in the game? Or would I? If visiting an Orion map in real life means that I get to scrutinize things to a greater detail than the game could ever present, then I'd probably go, yeah, the most lore bomb crazy place I could, like Arar or somewhere in Ore, I suppose. But if not, maybe Divinity's Reach. Again, like, if there's more detail visiting in real life, imagine how cool it would be to really sink into the cultural differences of the Ossen Quarter versus any of the other districts. Imagine what it would be like to see all these buildings and to visit the palace itself and so forth. DR would be pretty cool, and also not that threatening to my health. So, and you could probably also, what, can I now explore the Divinity's Reach sewers? Which, you know, we absolutely have to get at some point. So maybe, I don't know, probably there. Frederick Hoffman says, what was my first video game? I think, I can't answer this 100%, but I think it was probably Ski Free. An old game that was bundled on early Windows operating systems, as far as I remember. You'd play as this little guy that would skate down an icy mountain, and eventually you'd get chased by a Yeti, who is inevitably catching up with you. And if you survive long enough, then the background just starts looping. I think it was probably Ski Free, something like that. If it wasn't Ski Free, it was one of those weird old, like, Windows-style games like that. And I probably played a lot of Windows games like that until eventually, finally, I started looking at... I remember when I was very young playing a lot of, like, Sega stuff, like Echo the Dolphin I remember being really into when I was on holiday when I was maybe 6 or 7. It's hard. It's hard. I played games before that as well, though. It's tricky. The first main console, if this is maybe more insight to you, though, I would consider myself a bit late. Well, we didn't have too much money when I was younger, and it took a while for me to really get into console gaming at home, and it was probably the PlayStation 1 that was my entry point. I'm of an age bracket where that's a bit weird. It should have been an earlier console. My other experiences before that came from visiting other people's houses and, again, doing stuff on PCs and things rather than some dedicated console. But when we got a PS1, there was a selection of games that I'm very, very nostalgic about. So yeah, maybe Ski Free, something around there, one of those early kind of games like that. Moving on, Jim S says, you've talked in the past about map obsolescence. What a great word. With regard to Living World Season 3 maps, but I'm concerned about the future Heart of Thorns maps, as well as the new expansion comes into play, especially regarding requirements for legendary weapons. I've done 2 Heart of Thorns legendaries, Astralario a year ago and Chukun Champawat recently, and already I saw it was much more difficult to find an organized dragon stand to get a Heart of Thorns map completion the second time around. This is particularly concerning because the devs have stated that the remainder of Gen 2 legendaries will not require the expansion pack, since we paid for them with Heart of Thorns. So, of course, the recipes for the remaining Gen 2 legendaries can't include expansion map completion gifts. So if you could be stuck short of completing new legendaries by a handful of POIs, vistas and hero challenges that are walled off by the Dragon Stand meta because everybody is off having fun with the new content. Do you think this will be the case? And if so, what do you think the devs will do about it, if anything? This is a really complicated question. Now, the devs could do a targeted, dedicated look back at Heart of Thorns and rein in its reliance on group content. After Heart of Thorns came out, we saw the Expansion 2 team take the time to, you know, shift the currencies and learn some lessons from what they'd seen. Maybe we will see something happen again after Expansion 2 releases, but they won't just reassess Expansion 2, but they'll also reassess Heart of Thorns. I think you're right that this kind of reliance on a lot of group stuff and then everybody moves away is a bit of a fear. But there is another aspect to this as well, and it's just on how events scale. You know, inherently the game should have an answer to this, and that's the fact that events scale. Maybe Dragon Stand just needs a bit of tuning where intelligent players can push those events even with just like 2 people, right? If we're in a situation where 2 people can push north, 2 people can push mid, 2 people can push south, then maybe that's okay. You know, 2 people can kill the north Octovine, west, south, east. If they balance that around that, so a meta can be kind of completed with 10 players instead of 100 to 150, then maybe that's all that needs to happen. Maybe that's the bit of retuning they need to go for. But I think you're right. I think that's a very legitimate concern. It's a legitimate concern for all MMOs, really, as they add new maps and do more things. But I think Guild Wars 2 does have the answers. It just might need a little TLC from the devs. Jonathan asks, how are you doing? I'm doing very good. I'm very excited about the patch today, and I'm suddenly aware how long this video is or will continue to get. Yeah, I'm pretty much buzzing for the finale. It's going to be really, really badass. Pink Unicorn has 2 fairly long questions here. First of all, they say, I've asked you about your own series a few times, but have a slightly different angle this time. With respect to world building, what resources would you recommend? I'm going to be hopping into the shoes of being a DM for D&D at the end of summer, and I'm hoping to hit the ground running with at least the overarching themes of my world nailed down by then. I know you've said before that it's a topic you can totally go crazy in, but what are a couple of references that you found to be quintessential to your learning process? Well, listen, through specifically being a DM, I have 2 really important things that I think you should do. First, look into map making, okay? There's a variety of great map making subreddits. There's also a website called the Cartographers Guild. They have excellent guides. Map making is a huge amount of fun, and I think is a great entry point for anyone when they get into world building. You kind of, for me, I believe you sort of start with a map, and then you dig down deeper into it once you've got your general geography laid out. But as a DM, you know, it's not just about making a world map, but you can also make maps for cities, you can make maps for dungeons, all these kinds of things. Also, my other advice to you, if you're going to be a DM, is check out the Guild of Ambience on YouTube. They've really been blowing up lately. I'm a bit of a hipster about this YouTube channel. I was subbed to them when they were like nothing. But they're really, really fantastic for giving you ambient noises for the backgrounds of your scenes. So when your players are traipsing through a forest, when they're in a potion store, when they're in a dungeon, when they're at the top of a tower, any of these kind of things, you can play these sound effects in these YouTube videos to really establish a setting. You do that, and then you also have a couple of little maps and a little bit of like artistic reference material. Trust me, it's going to be a great session of D&D. I don't even play much D&D. I don't even understand much about D&D, but believe me, these are really, really great things that you should be looking into. And the second you do these things and you pick some, you'll find the inspiration starts flowing for you in the kind of adventure, the kind of story you want to set up and the way you want to act as a DM. So it's really fantastic. I would start there because that will give you so much inspiration. And I think that for a lot of people, or at least me, is kind of where I I always struggle when it comes to world building and it comes to being creative. It's finding that inspiration. I always draw inspiration from science and from looking at geography and looking at the way that... So, for example, my world building video that I did on the Patreon drive talks a lot about building a world map based through the way tectonic plates work and just learning interesting facts about the way that tectonic plates on Earth work and, you know, maybe twisting that a little bit for your own world and just starting with a few lines and then ending up having a lot of interesting stuff going on. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend that from a DM perspective. From just general world building, I have a multi-Reddit. I do so much on Reddit these days. I have a multi-Reddit established with just a ton of writing and inspiration and world building related subs in it. So simple prompts, writing prompts, world building, map making resources, stuff like that. My recommendation to you, because it's all going to be very finely tuned into what you like and what you're interested in, is just take a start on a top level place like Our World Building and look through their resources. Our World Building has a lot of great resources. There are some fairly, well, no, not really. There are some people trying to be successful YouTubers dealing with world building subject material that I think is a very rich area to go into, by the way. And you can check out some of their series. You can also check out similar subreddits from there, and you can just keep going. Those sidebars are incredible. Check the sidebars whenever you visit a new subreddit. Filter by top. You know, this is really just basic Redditing advice here, but when you do it through the world of world building, you get a lot of great resources come out of that. Again, I haven't done much of this for a long time, so I couldn't give you more specifics than that. But by doing that, you'll find pretty much anything you need to know. Sorry if you felt like that answer's a little bit too waffly. Next question that you ask is other questions I have. Oh, have I ever played D&D? As a lore nerd myself, I imagine it's something... I played a bit of Pathfinder. I've never really had great experiences myself. It's something I know that's right up my alley. However, it's a big time sink, and I've just never found a group that clicks. And I know saying that, I'm going to get a bunch of people saying, hey, WP, come join my group. Again, it's a big time sink, and I'm just not sure whether it's something for me to pursue right now. Thank you, though, for all the requests that would inevitably come from that. Moving on, Pink Unicorn also says, on the topic of your channel, what is your rough estimate on your plans for non-Guild Wars 2 stuff? I know that we just finished Tomb Raider, and I have Elder Scrolls on the horizon, but what cadence are you looking for? That other things before or after. So I do have a lot of really great scheduling in place that could allow me to do a lot of good stuff. My dream has always been 2 videos a day. One of them's on Guild Wars, one of them's not on Guild Wars. And I will continue to try pursuing that ambition as time goes forward. And hopefully one day it will click and I'll become a diligent enough worker with strong enough workflows behind him that I get that out. That's my idea. And, you know, the day we finally get through a lot of the Elder Scrolls stuff, we'll look at other series. The only other thing that I know for a fact I want to do, and I'm even prepared to put on my plate right now, is Final Fantasy XII when it comes to the PC, which I've talked about many times before. Second, on the topic of Guild Wars 2, what are your thoughts on Guild Wars 2's veteran progression systems? I feel like masteries go too quickly, loot is basically a non-factor anymore, obviously by design, but still, and achievements have really dried up for the likes of you and I. Living story APs are really no numbers, and are done within a week or 2 at most. It leaves me with a dearth of tangible goals, and has me longing for something else to do in the game. I love your ideas for PvE leagues, but I feel like ArenaNet doesn't see the same promise in them that you do. Do you have any thoughts on how ArenaNet could motivate more veteran retention? That is a hell of a question. What you've just asked is how does Guild Wars 2 become a successful game? How does ArenaNet become a super successful company? That's literally, you've asked, that's the golden question, and you've phrased it in a brilliant way. You know my answer to this already. It's PvE leagues. There are certain things that they could do to the core experience and the expression of our way through the game, and resetting things that would be so incredible. It would just be unending wealth of content that has minimal input from the devs. The thing is, right now Guild Wars 2 is in a place where, as a game, it gets retention through hard work. Every second, really, that people get out of the game can be attributed to recent development efforts rather than old development efforts. And that's the thing with Guild Wars 2. It's like a sieve. What they make is that they're constantly having to pour stuff back in, but they're constantly having to work on it. They're constantly having to wrestle with it. And for a lot of people, they might say that's okay. That's the way that gaming's gone. But I think that you can have a stronger core structure that gives you more retention, so that the gaps in that sieve are just a little bit thinner. On the other hand, though, I do think APs do still interest me. I do like getting achievement points. I think things like Guild Wars 2 efficiency and the API work that's been done with the game has really opened a lot of doors as well. You know, just in terms of how many different leaderboards and things there are that you can go for. But I think that, yeah, over time, this may become more and more of a challenge. The other problem with retention for Guild Wars 2 these days is they care so much about story and they work so much on story, and that's great for someone who cares about story like myself, and you know, that's not lost on me. But I also think it's a very dangerous thing to do when, I mean, let's leave the state of the core story out of it for a second. You know, just frankly, the fact you don't even have Living World Season 1, right? No Living World Season 1, people are being asked to invest in Bram, right? If Bram is not in this finale because we're going to Ore, then we're being asked to invest in Bram and what he does for the next expansion and beyond. And a lot of players don't even really know who he is. You don't even get a moment where you get to meet him and say, you know, organically. He just pops up at some point. You know, there's a real problem there, I think, for retention too, with, you know, how much influence there does, how much they lean on story for their later developments. And, you know, it's not even a complete product right now. So I did hear an idea that maybe after X-Pac 2 comes out, that team can go and re-implement Season 1. I think that would be an incredible idea that would solve quite a few problems. But yeah, maybe there needs to be new reward structures that branch across all aspects of a Living World season. Maybe we need better crafting. Mastery, certainly, I think we're incredibly lackluster. Elite specializations aren't a great progression system, as we've seen. There was a miscommunication, and most people don't see it as one at all. And yeah, I think there is a bit of a gap there. I do. I just don't have any answers that aren't major feature changes like, you know, the League idea we've discussed before. Maybe I should do a dedicated video on that for people who don't watch the streams, because a lot of people might have no idea what's going on. Anyway, moving on. Frederick Hoffman says, what exactly don't you like about Sherlock Season 4? Holy crap. So this must mean I talked about it in a recent Q&A as well, and I ranted about it earlier as well. That's brilliant. All right, so there's a huge number of different problems with Season 4, but I think, and it would, you know, I'm not going to go into a huge Sherlock Season 4 review, and it's been several months since I've seen it, but it's both macroscopic issues and small moment-to-moment issues that they really failed in, right? So they did some interesting stuff with the setting building and this idea of the extra sibling and stuff, right? And a lot of people were hoping that it was all building together, that some of the issues with a character death and some of the issues that we'd seen earlier in the season might dovetail at the end, and that we might actually get these answers, they might actually work out. But none of those really kind of broad stories did in the end. But to me, when we're talking about this on like the macroscopic level, I just think they lost spirit of what was actually great about Sherlock and why it was fun to be smart about this show. You know, there's a reason why some of the most loved episodes of this show were completely self-contained. You know, they were the Hounds of the Baskerville, and it was really just about that. It was one of their adventures. Season 3 had this weird thing where it was sort of trying to titillate us and link through all the episodes, and then it tried to give us a payoff that just didn't exist, right? When I say they lost the spirit of the show, the last episode of Sherlock Season 4 is not an episode of Sherlock. It's some kind of weird version of the Saw movies, told with Sherlock characters. The first episode is more akin to a Bond movie starring a character a lot of people weren't interested in than a Sherlock episode. And the middle episode was more focused on the episodes around it than it was itself. But I think that episode 2 of Season 4 was really the best that it actually got. I think that that's a real problem. I think that they completely lost touch of why Sherlock has fans and what those fans were actually trying to get out of the show. But then you can pick at any number, and I will not do a huge, you know, list of this. You can pick at any number of little moments from these episodes where you can clearly see they're treating you like a Neanderthal and they're just phoning it in. Like the jeopardy at the end of episode 3 is that someone is tied to the bottom of a well and it's raining and the water level is rising. And how is that person saved from... They're tied to the bottom of the well. And how ultimately, once we've had our emotional climax for a parallel story, how is this character saved in the nick of time? Well, they get there right at the last moment and throw a rope down and that character climbs out of the well. Wait, don't you guys see a problem with that? They were tied, and they don't explain and the fact that this person was tied to the well. It's just completely arbitrary nonsense that is so thinly constructed. Even the most basic plot incongruences and holes they don't look at. And that happens constantly in Season 4. And this is Sherlock, a show that was encouraging people to be analytical and to pay attention to small details. There was just very little, if anything, redeeming about that season, and it was very depressing because I think that that show, that interpretation of the Sherlock world, started really strong. But yeah, honestly, I'm a little hazy on the details at this point. The longer I speak on this topic, the higher chances that I'll start looking like an idiot. Let's move on. Ian Freeman Lee Hey WP, how successful do you feel the current style of marketing for new releases has been going? By this I mean the post-Colin model of little to no hype building until just before release happens. I myself have gone back and forth on it. At first I didn't like it, but I felt it diminished my overall excitement about the game's future. These days I've warmed up to it a bit, but I still wonder if they could have even more engagement by offering more communication. Curious to hear your feelings on this. So, it's funny. This is a weird one to me because I got to be honest, I feel like we have more communication now than we did during the Colin days. I really do. You know, I've followed this stuff very, very closely for a long time, and I feel like just having those big AMAs after each release is pretty we get answers there. Yes, they skirt around stuff, and yes, there's main things that they don't talk about, but generally speaking, I feel a bit more connected to the devs through those AMAs and through the way that they do this information than during, you know, Living World Season 2 or Season 1. People probably don't remember that while anymore, but it's not like before every Season 1 release there was a huge amount of marketing for it. There was like a cobbled together trailer that they'd throw out and a release page on the website, and that was it, and then you'd have the update, and occasionally sporadic interviews would come out without any rhyme or reason to them, and that was it. I think devs maybe were a little bit freer to sort of waffle about their ambitions for the game, and we've seen less of that. But, you know, I don't view it as actually that different these days under Mo. And if it is different, I feel like we get a little bit more information. People have branded those Colin days as days where it was all talk and no delivery. And I'm not sure whether that's entirely fair. I'm not sure, at least, that perspective comes purely from a communication strategy change, or that the one we're currently under is for the worse. The truth is, I think right now, so much has happened for the game. If you play the game in a broad perspective, so much is happening in the game that it sort of doesn't matter so much to me anymore. If all you do is world versus world, then yeah, you're going to loathe the communication strategy. However, if you're a bit more of a general fan of the game, and you do a bit of world versus world, but you do a bit of raiding, and you do a bit of PvE, and you dabble into PvP when Season 5 comes out, and when automated tournaments come out, if the broader the range that you play Guild Wars 2, the more you will enjoy Guild Wars 2, because every one of those AMAs will have something for you. Yeah, and I think that's a big problem a lot of the time as well. Even when you just look at classes, if all you do is play one class and you're not getting an answer you desperately care about for the warrior, then you're going to feel like there are communication issues more than someone who understands all the classes and plays all the classes and looks at all of the balance that happens in a patch instead of just that one little section about Guardian and it wasn't satisfying to you. So that would be my advice as well to a lot of people if they're feeling a bit jaded by this stuff. Appreciate the fact, get involved with more areas of the game, and you'll be rewarded in more areas of the game. Next question comes from Radical Compounds, who says, hey WP, a while ago you did a video on the current event achievement where some players went around Kryta, tearing down Lord Corticus propaganda posters. In the comments, some fans approved, joking that ArenaNet seemed to have tried to make Corticus seem like Donald Trump, and others didn't like it and said they like playing games to get away from the real world. Did you have any interpretations about this particular current event reflecting real world politics? And in general, do you think games should stay away from politics or try to incorporate them more? Sorry if this puts you on the spot, thanks. No, I remember that very clearly, and I didn't really pick up on that. I just thought this was a megalomaniacal, evil guy in game, and they were expressing different ways that he could do that in kind of a democratic setting almost, which is sort of what we see Kryta as. And then I think that, you know, just the heated debate and the times of the day, people wanted to draw parallels. You know, human beings, we like to see patterns and we draw conclusions and patterns all over the place. But to me, what they did with Corticus in Guild Wars 2 during those current event patches wasn't particularly different to what many franchises, books, TV, anything, other video games have done about their big evil villains that also exist within, you know, kind of council chambers and things like this. So I really didn't identify with people during those comparisons. I just think that people like to talk about politics a lot. Also, in general, I don't know. I'm very wary. There's a lot of discussion about this, how much politics should be in games. I'm very wary when I deal with this topic because I kind of realize that my age bracket, where I am in the real world right now, I am a part of a very politicized demographic right now. You know, we're at that age where we're becoming adults and we're like, oh my god, we have a say in the way that the world is run, and we're getting news from places that we choose to get news from, and we're actually interested in it, and we don't have other things, you know, preoccupying us or bogging us down, and we start to feel like these political things are very important. And that's very much my demographic right now as we ride the wave through the events of today. And maybe we're a little bit more politicized than previous generations and so on, but my point is anyway that there's going to be a part where the audiences start seeing politics everywhere. even if it isn't necessarily everywhere. Like this general vibe that people believe that politics are getting into video games too much, it might not be true. You have to consider your position. Has there really been a change? And when it comes to Guild Wars 2 specifically, I don't think I've really seen too much of a change. Not really. You know, there was a horrendous Reddit thread just the other day. Some new story editor, right? A friggin' story editor joined ArenaNet, and everyone was judging the hell out of her based on her agendas on Twitter and her political leanings on Twitter. And it's just ridiculous to me. It's like, it's absolutely ridiculous. Whenever I see people doing that, I'm like, these people have no idea how the real world works. Absolutely no idea. And they're just not discussions to get involved in. Anyway, that's slightly off topic. But yeah, those are my general opinions when you put me on the spot, and I haven't really had time to think about them. Who knows? Maybe those challenge in the future. Jaguar Kitty says, I've been trying for days to think what I would ask you, but as I don't play Guild Wars, and I already know, or I think I do, that your next huge project is to do with the Elder Scrolls, which I'm thrilled by, all I can think of are questions like this. Have you ever listened to Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History podcast? No. Have you ever read David Mitchell's Number 9 Dream? Everyone focuses on Cloud Atlas, but I've always loved Number 9 Dream too. No, but it's funny, you mentioned that guy David Mitchell. I'm a big fan, well, I'm a reasonable fan of the comedian, and I actually listened to his autobiography, his audiobook, quite recently, but he's not the author, so I'm completely unfamiliar with the author, David Mitchell, unfortunately. Have I ever seen the movie Moonlight? No. What did I think of the HBO series Girls? I didn't watch it. You know, random stuff like that. A conversation over dinner, which if you ever make it to Vancouver, let me know and I'll feed you. Jaguar Kitty, I hate to say it, but I think we might be very different people. You've just given me a ton of stuff that presumably you thought I would be into and know, and I actually don't know anything about any of it. So I have a feeling that having a conversation together over dinner might be a bit scary for the both of us. We might be just desperately trying to latch onto something that we have in common, and it will be something very arbitrary that we're not either particularly into in the end. Maybe try again next Super Q&A. We'll see. We'll dive into Wood and Potatoes, ignorance, and a ton of other stuff once again. Kevin Armentrout. Oh, Armentrout. That always makes me think of Breaking Bad. WP posted this on the previous Q&A, so please don't mind the duplicate. The altar of betrayal is the point of interest in the Straits of Devastation for Balthazar's temple. What do you think that relates to, given what we know about Balthazar? Right, it's a great question, isn't it? Is this why he has fallen god? The altar of betrayal, or is this him betraying his brother Mengus? Not really sure. But it's a great idea, isn't it? And I wish I talked a little bit more about that with Balthazar speculation. Who knows? After episode 6, there could still be a lot more space for a ton more Balthazar speculation, and we'll get to talking about that. It's a very curious idea, though, isn't it? And it would also mean that they had vague thoughts about this story even in 2012. Josh says, how do you feel about the 30+ minute Wood and Potatoes video meme that comes with every piece of information that ArenaNet puts out these days? Yeah, I've talked about this a little bit recently, and people, it's weird, a good chunk of people seem to think I'm offended by it, or that I'm upset by it, or that if I ever call attention to it, it's that, you know, I must be pissed off. No, I think it's fun, and I just think it's people having a little bit of fun. And ultimately, I do draw on small things and then get a lot of discussion out of it. And, you know, I view it through that lens, that people were just messing about a bit. I get a little bit worried because I know we're on the internet and I know there's a lot of jealousy and seething hatred. And if you're not a Wood and Potatoes fan and you see everyone constantly going, oh, I'm looking forward to his really long videos, I feel a bit worried that will, you know, that will draw some heat on me, you know, that you'll get these seething, angry people out there. But, I mean, I can't really do anything about that. I try not to actively encourage it. I did realize I'd fanned the flames a lot. I did 2 videos where I drew attention to it, and after those 2 videos, a lot of people started posting, oh, I can't wait for Wood and Potatoes really, really long video. And I think what they were doing was they were fishing to be in the video, but then they were getting, you know, massive amounts of upvote and support. It's a cool meme. What can I say? It's very flattering and it's very loving, and, you know, I have fun with it. I do draw on a lot of information from small things. My one thing I would add to that, though, by the way, guys, all right, for anyone who's using it as a serious critique, is the fact the original source material that gets me talking could be a single frame. It doesn't matter. It's what that represents, right? Oh, I got a 30-minute discussion out of a single screenshot because that screenshot was of ore. I wasn't talking about the screenshot for 30 minutes. I was talking about ore for 30 minutes. I wasn't discussing every little pixel. I was probably like, oh, there's a bit of unbound magic there. And then we talk about ore and we talk about what it represents. You know, if you see a picture of a world leader you know, doing some salacious, questionable activity in the back of a taxi cab, you know, people could get hours and hours and hours of podcasting and discussion and news, media, hype and circus stuff around that. Even if the original video is just a 3-second, you know, shot from someone's, you know, phone. It's irrelevant how long the original thing is. It's what it represents. And so I've never been ashamed of getting a lot of discussion out of, you know, a very little teaser or a very little image or something. Because sometimes, you know, it's about the stories behind what they tell. Picture tells 1,000 words, and I'm a pretty good example of that, probably. Anyway, so yeah, next question, and finally, this is the last one. This is from Marcus, who says, as a fellow European, have you ever been to Austria? If not, where would you like to go? I have the feeling that Austria stands in the shadow of Germany and Switzerland. If you ever get to do your traveling stuff, Austria is definitely worth a visit. You know, it's funny, Marcus, because I actually did read some people talking about amazing stuff being in Austria, and you'd be surprised, I think, for a lot of people who are doing these big backpacking trips through Europe, or they're going to see all of the sites, how many skip over places like that, even though there are these incredible things to see. The truth is, as much as I'd like to be well-traveled, I'm not well-traveled. The past 7 years, 8 years, Christ, while I've been doing this, I certainly haven't been in a position to be well-traveled, and I didn't really take many opportunities when I was a little bit younger either. At some point, I would love to travel Europe. You know, if there's a day where I'm not doing this online anonymously anymore, I'd love to vlog about that and share that with you guys. Cool, wouldn't that be incredible? If that was my mainstay for videos, just traveling the world and teaching you guys interesting things about different countries, that'd be very cool. It's to any American, I think it would be crazy to hear how little I've traveled around Europe, considering how close it is. I think the average American who's visited other states has probably traveled the equivalent far more distance than I have. But, you know, we have much less of a culture for that in Europe because everything is smaller and all of our houses are smaller and everything's closer together. You can exist in Europe without knowing how to drive. You can't quite in the States. So, or generally most areas. So, yeah, I've not traveled as much as I would like to, and I'll bear Austria in mind. There you go, guys. That's the super Q&A. Hopefully that tides you over right until the release. If you watch this as this video came out, the release is probably just a couple of moments away. Go in there, guys. Have fun. And leave your questions in the comments of this video for the next regular Q&A, and I'll be looking through there. Cheers, guys. I'll catch you next time.